It's not how fast you can do it, it's how slow you can do it correctly. Hey guys, this week we're taking a look at The Talent Code. Greatness isn't born, it's grown. This book is by Daniel Coyle. This was a book recommended to me by my trumpet teacher, Matt Ernst. He's principal trumpet of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. So I wanted to read this because he often would talk about it in our lessons. And this whole book is based around myelin. Myelin is this cool little part of our brain that sends signals to do everything. And myelin is what makes us good or talented at things, how much myelin you have. Now, myelin is a relatively new scientific discovery, so there's not a whole lot of information out about it yet. There's still research being done, so that will, I'm sure there will be a lot more research than what's in this book. I think this came out in 2003. I'll write it up somewhere over here. So this is a great book. Overall, I loved it. If you've watched some of my other book reviews, some of them I just go on and on through the whole book. I've decided, at least for this one, we're going to see how it goes, but I'm not going to go through the book as in depth, because then maybe you won't want to read it then. So I just have a few points that I wanted to bring out. Let me just go through the chapters here, kinda. So there's the way this book is broken up into is there's 3 parts with an introduction at the beginning and then an epilogue at the very end. So part 1 is all about deep practice. Part 2 is about ignition, and part 3 is about master coaching. And then the epilogue is very interesting, actually. Talks about the myelin world and other things like that. This book is full of information and examples, a lot of examples of high-performing people, whether that be musicians or athletes or grand chess masters. There's so many great examples in here. But at the same time, that's one of my critiques of this book is I noticed as I was reading, my mind would drift a little bit sometimes. It's very informative, it's very good, but sometimes I felt like I was bored, for lack of a better term. So it can be dry at times. But overall, this is a very, very informative book. It's great. I loved it. Let me just quickly go through these notes. I just have 3 here. And the first one here is all within, let me just get the right chapter here. This is in chapter 4, the 3 rules of deep practice, and I just thought I'd talk about it a little. Rule 1 is chunk it up. So I think of that when I was reading through this whole book. I'm a trumpet player. That's kind of how I was thinking. So practicing as a musician. So chunking means we don't want to just run through everything. We want to play things and fix things as they go along. Okay? That's the idea of chunking. So you chunk little things together so that your brain can handle it all, and then you can put it all together at the end. You can only do so much at one time. You need to absorb the whole thing. Slow it down. That's so important, and that's the opening quote I started with here. It's not how fast you can do it, it's how slow you can do it correctly. Right? I don't know if you've heard the saying, practice makes perfect. That's not actually true. Practice makes permanent. Not perfect, permanent. If you practice mistakes over and over and over again and never fix them, that's what's going to happen. So every time you do something, the myelin in your brain, these little wiring, I like to think of it as like circuitry, like electronics. So the more and more you do something, the more and more I don't know, do this, my brain is laying more and more wires like, okay, Adam needs to do this a lot. That's why if the saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, comes into into play. There's an excellent point in the back of the book in the epilogue that I remember reading about Alzheimer's, and it's something like so many more people with Alzheimer's have lower education levels. They aren't using their brain as much, I guess. So it's so important with everything in life. If you don't use it, you lose it because of that myelin. If you're constantly using it, you're telling your body, okay, we need to keep creating myelin in these areas. So I just thought that was really, really fascinating. And a call to any of you older people out there, you got to be using it. Use your brain, always be learning. If you're watching a book review, you probably are though. But anyways, going back to it, rule 2 is repeat it. That kind of goes into what I was just saying over and over. There's the 10,000 hour rule, right? You just have to learn it so well. My former trumpet teacher, when he was telling me to play music, Ryan Smith is his name, and he would tell me, you need to know it so well that you don't know how to play it wrong. Think about that for a second. I'll say it again. Play something and know it so well that you don't know how to play it wrong. There's only one way to do it, and that's the right way. If you try and play it wrong, you can't. That's where you want to get to. I can't honestly say that I've gotten there with anything in my life. But that's the goal, and that kind of goes into this. He goes into why daily practice matters. I'm just going to read this a little bit here. As Vladimir Horowitz, the virtuoso pianist who kept performing into his 80s, put it, if I skip practice for 1 day, I notice. If I skip practice for 2 days, my wife notices. If I skip for 3 days, the world notices. Unfortunately, myelin isn't forgiving. It's not like you'll lose everything if you don't practice for 3 days, right? I think it says something in this book, 30 days. I don't know if it's mentioned in here, I don't remember anything, but that might have something to do with the saying of habits forming. It takes 30 days. So very, very fascinating. It also gets into here, you hear of people practicing or working on their craft for 10 hours a day or something. But through studies, it actually shows most virtuoso experts in their fields practice between 3 and 5 hours a day, no matter what it is. Because that's where deep practice comes into play. I kind of skipped over that section. That's a really great section if you're interested in learning how to get better quickly. I think the book opens up with a young girl, clarinet player, who does in 6 minutes what most people do in 6 months. Just by focusing, correcting mistakes, and going through slowly. It's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Going back to this, rule 3, learn to feel it. If you hear a string out of tune, it should bother you. You can't just let things slide by, right? You always need to be correcting things. I love this too. Pick a target, reach for it, evaluate the gap between the target and the reach, and return to step 1. That's so good, right? And that goes in with planning with life and everything. What's your end goal? Work backwards to it and figure out how to get there, right? So good. But anyways, that's a little bit within the deep practice section. I'll just talk briefly. Ignition is all about how to get started. It talks a lot about hotbeds throughout this book as well. Why so many, I think, in Brazil, it talked a lot about Brazilian soccer players, how there are so many really great soccer players coming out of Brazil all of a sudden. Why is that? Brazilian, is it genetics and yada, yada, yada? No. It's because of a number of reasons. They talk about a game they play. It was really interesting. There's I can't think of the name of it. I'll write it up here, but it's a smaller version of soccer. It's like indoor soccer. You had less room to work with, and they found that those players were way better than players who were playing in the larger field because they have to be better basically. I'm not explaining that very well. You'll have to read the book. But that whole section is really fascinating. And the whole hotbed thing, they go through other things. There's a section about a school, I think it's in California, that uses a lot of things, KIPP, KIPP teachers. But that whole section is fascinating as well, just kind of talking about how, there's this idea that some people are virtuosos and geniuses and all that stuff, which is totally true. 1 in a million people do exist. Probably more like 1 in a billion people do exist, though. That 3-year-old virtuoso piano player, right? But really, most of the virtuosos that you think of, all the experts, all these great sports heroes are just like you and me. They've just learned how to get into deep practice and use myelin to their advantage, even if they don't really know what myelin is. That's how you get really, really good at a skill. That kind of goes back to the title here. Greatness isn't born, it's grown. It's grown. This I found really interesting and just want to touch on it for a little bit. Self-discipline was twice as accurate as IQ in predicting the student's grade point average. I just thought that was really cool. It's not genetics, it's not anything like that. It's how self-disciplined you are. And some of that, I guess, would be, it's kind of like that whole nature-nurture thing, right? And your parents do play a large role as a student, but teachers do so much as well. Now I'm just thinking of stuff off the top of my head, but in this book it also talks about schools in Norway, I want to say, how they're so much better than schools in the US. And why is that? We have about the same things that we're teaching. It's not, on the surface level, it doesn't seem like it's going to be any better, right? Norway, US, pretty equal with everything except one thing: the quality of teachers. The quality of teachers I'm going to keep saying Norway, I might be wrong, but the quality of teachers in Norway is way higher than that of America. Here in the US, we don't value our teachers very well. Now, I'm very biased. I have most of my friends are teachers. My girlfriend is planning on being a teacher, so I have a very high view of teachers. But at the same time, in Norway, these students are so much better than our students because they have way better teachers. They're more passionate. Teaching over there is competitive. You'll get 63 applications for one job, whereas in the US, we're scrambling to find teachers sometimes. So there's just a higher standard, and that leads to a higher standard of students. And I think that's something the United States could learn. But that's just a side note on the state of education. But anyways, this whole book is really interested if you're interested in learning about how to get better at a specific skill. It's so interesting. Like I said, it can be a little dry at times, but I learned a lot about this. I'm just scratching the surface with everything I just said, and honestly, I might reread it in a few years just to remind myself. I'm still a little hazy on some of this stuff, so I want to get back into it, but I'll let it be for a few years, I think. But it's a great book if you're interested in stuff like that, if you're trying to become great in whatever field it may be. So that's all I had to say on the talent code. Well-deserved spot on my shelf. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please do comment that below. If you like the video, please give me a big old thumbs up. Helps me out a ton. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you never miss another video with me. Like I said, comment below if you have any questions. Also, if you have any recommendations, I'm always looking for new books to read. I have my Goodreads link below. I record these way in advance, so I'm reading something else right now. If you want to stay up to date, you can check it out there. I also have all my social medias and stuff like that if you want to keep more up to date with me. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.